If you become the premier, how will you fix this healthcare crisis? Will you fix it with the resources Ontario or funding, enough funding, or you also as a premier need more funding from the federal?
Emergency wait times in Ontario are through the roof. We're seeing emergency rooms closing, which I think is a really scary thing for anybody. We should be winning on these issues. We should be providing better healthcare.
Your plan,
so I
will you ask federal government for more funding, or these fundings are good
I
enough?
will continue. What I will do is I will spend the dollars that we have here first.
So how you see the crime situation in Ontario? Because Ontario is the biggest province here. Toronto is the biggest city in Canada. More people, more issues, more crime. But other provinces also feeling the same. The crime rate all over Canada has gone up in last few years. What do you thought?
Doug Ford government is not doing. We should be working with the auto manufacturers, with the industry to put in place mechanisms, technology.
If you become the premier, how will you tackle these issues? Because these are like passing the bucks on each other.
I hear you. I agree with you. I think there's a tendency among politicians of all levels to pass the buck and say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm a provincial politician, I can't solve that problem. That's not true, right? You as a premier, you have a responsibility to be fighting for your community, for your people. My opinion on this is that the universities, the colleges in Ontario have been underfunded by our government.
What is the issue with LTB? Why can't we fix it? Landlords, if they don't get a rent for 1 year, how will they pay the mortgages? There are professional tenants. They cry. And recently we asked Premier Ford. He said we are working on it.
In Ontario, we fund far less our universities and colleges than any other province in this country. Bramptonians have elected people at the provincial level, at the city level, at the federal level. These are the people that should be working for you to solve this problem. All sitting down together. If they're not doing it, something has to change. To see politicians to come out, but they shouldn't just be talking to you, they should be listening to you, and then they should be going away and working, like you said, to solve those problems. Why aren't we building those schools with a plan and a vision for what's coming, for the growth, for the new students that are going to be coming to our communities? We have no long-term planning, and we have a government that's not interested in the rise in addiction in our communities. When I come to Brampton and I go to the Gurdwaras and I meet the Gurdwara councils and I talk to people in communities all across here, I hear a lot of people who are concerned about the rise in mental health and addiction issues here in Brampton.
Recently, the National Post, they published this article that BC plans to give safer supply recreational fentanyl to minors, and parents will have a no say on that. So this is a serious issue. If you become the premier, you won't bring these kind of policies here in Ontario.
But we have to have a plan in place
that
ensures that the infrastructure, as you said, is there, that the housing is there for the people that are coming, that the jobs and opportunities are there, that the innovation opportunities are there, so we can continue to be leading in job creation. I don't believe that. I believe that government and politicians have a really important role to play. But we need to be out there with a plan. We need to not just leave it up in the air, and we need to address the issues that people are feeling in our communities right now. If we don't do that, our communities will become more divided.
We have a lot of international students who come here to make their careers, but what we have seen, the public colleges, universities, like recent protests are going on. What is the fault of the students? What is the fault of the universities? Leader of the official opposition party of Ontario, NDP, leader Marit Stiles is with us in the studio. We'll be discussing the issues concerning Ontarians. What are these? Already 1 year passed for the leader and how she is making government accountable. Marit, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thank you. So almost a year completed for you as a leader. How you are making sure that government is accountable, doing what Ontarians need?
Right. Well, last year was quite a year in Ontario, I think, a very interesting year. And as I look back on it over the last year, the first year of my leadership, one of the things I've been reflecting on is the fact that life is not better for most people since this government was elected 5 years ago. And certainly over the last year, it's less affordable for people, right? People are having a harder time making the rent, paying their mortgages, paying for groceries. Life has gotten harder for most people. And so one of the things that we've done over the last year, I think quite successfully, is we were holding the government to account every single day at Queen's Park in Parliament. We were holding them to account on affordability, on issues like the Greenbelt and the development of the Greenbelt, and we've been very successful in getting them to reverse course. So I think the last year, we've shown that we can make a real difference in getting the government to reverse their bad policies. My plan now is to keep doing that on things like the privatization of healthcare, to make life more affordable for people and make sure that they have access to the services that they need when they need it, because we're all paying a lot of money for these things. I want to make sure that we're getting the services that we deserve and that we pay for.
So, firstly, I'll come to the healthcare crisis, because if health is good, everything is good.
Yes.
So, healthcare crisis is there. Everybody knows that's the fact, not only in Ontario, but Canada-wide. So, recently, you announced that 3 solutions to the government, like do this, this, this. So, how you see the healthcare crisis here in Ontario and in the Canada?
Well, I would say, first of all, that Ontario has one of the worst healthcare crises right now in the country. So absolutely things are bad. And of course, in communities like Brampton, I'm going to say the thing we all know, which is that Brampton is very underserved. I mean, one of the largest populations of any city in the country, and yet still only one hospital. I mean, an urgent care center that's not available when people need it. I mean, this is a problem, but it is a problem we're seeing everywhere in the province. And look, under the previous Liberal government, we had hallway healthcare. These days, they're putting people in garages at hospitals. It's gotten worse, not better. So the solutions are about how we handle the staffing in our healthcare system predominantly. So that means things like we need to start paying some respect to those healthcare workers. Nurses need ratios of how many patients they're going to be dealing with. We see the British Columbia NDP government doing that. It's working really well. It's holding on to those nurses and those healthcare workers.
So you mean to say in British Columbia, there is no healthcare crisis?
No, but what they're doing is they're bringing forward real solutions that are having great results. So, one of the issues we hear from healthcare workers here in Ontario is we're overwhelmed, we're overburdened. We have a government that's fighting us in court to keep our wages down, right? And we're dealing with more and more patients and less workers, less and less nurses. So the government in British Columbia said, you know what? We're going to set a limit on it. We're going to say you deal with this many patients. It maintains good patient care. People are going to get the care they need. Nurses aren't going to be overwhelmed.
Still, what are the wait times there in British Columbia and what are the wait times here in
Right.
Ontario?
So in BC, they've just implemented this, and what they're finding and what nurses here are telling me is that's what we have to do here in Ontario if we're going to hold on to those nurses. In Ontario, we're recruiting nurses, but we're losing them faster than we can recruit them.
So what is the wait time here in Ontario for
in
the
Ontario
emergency
right
wait
now?
Times?
Emergency wait times in Ontario are through the roof. We're seeing emergency rooms closing, which I think is a really scary thing for anybody. I mean, I hear from people all the time, and I certainly imagine you have somebody in your family who needs urgent care and you can't get it. This is a very scary place to be. So we see urgent care centers, emergency rooms closing. We have wait times through the roof. We know that the issue is about workers in our hospitals. So we need to hold on to them. We need to attract them. So that's one of the things we have to do. We have to stop fighting in court to keep their wages down. And these are the things that are going to attract and keep those nurses and those other healthcare workers here. And that's what's going to solve the problem in healthcare. But can I just add one other thing? 2.2 million Ontarians don't have a family doctor. This is outrageous. Here in Brampton, every time I come, I meet organizations who say, we want to open a community health center where we have nurses and nurse practitioners and doctors all in one place. If we expand that, we can get people the care they need in their community, and less people will have to go to hospital.
So what is the reason you see for the healthcare crisis, either in Ontario, BC, Manitoba, or Canada-wide? What is the reason you see as a leader?
I think that we, as governments all across the country for years now, have not been doing the work that we needed to do to address the staffing shortages. We knew this was going to be...
They have not invested much in the healthcare.
I think it's that they haven't invested, but they've also allowed the conditions to be worse and worse and worse. So, healthcare workers like nurses working longer hours, seeing more patients, feeling like a crisis themselves. They're overworked, they're stressed, and they're leaving. And so what we are competing, not just with other countries for those workers, because we are, but also within our own country with other provinces. So Ontario has to step up, and we haven't done it. And we've seen Liberal and Conservative governments over and over again make the wrong choices. We need to invest our public healthcare dollars in our hospitals, in public healthcare, and we need to stop seeing those dollars shifted into things like private nursing agencies.
Marit, people, Ontarians, Canadians, they are confused. Reason is different provinces have different governments.
Yes.
Last year, 2 times, the 13 premiers of Canada, once they met in Victoria, once they met in Winnipeg, they appealed to the federal government. Whatever share you give to the provinces for healthcare is not enough. When we talked to the federal government, they said we give enough funding to the provinces, and they spend the funding somewhere else, not on the healthcare. Provinces says when 13 premiers come together, appeal to the federal government for the healthcare crisis. It's a serious issue Canada-wide. Always issues of medicines are in Ontario, in the other provinces also. Wait time in Ontario is 6 hours, then wait time in BC is also approximately 6 hours. So nothing has changed across the provinces. So my question is, if you become the premier, how will you fix this healthcare crisis? Will you fix it with the resources Ontario or funding, enough funding, or you also as a premier need more funding from the federal? Because issue when I asked, mass immigration is also here. Coming, people are coming to the country and they need demand supply. So what are your comments?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, every few years, the provincial premiers come together and they say, look, the federal government has to give us more for healthcare. And the truth is, we are going to see that need grow, as you said. There's no question. The difference, I would say, is, look, Ontario was once, when I first came to Ontario 30 years ago, Ontario was a leader, right? I grew up in another province in Newfoundland where it was really hard to get the healthcare we needed, where many communities didn't have family doctors. You came to Ontario, you had the promise of good healthcare, of good schools, of being able to afford a home, right? On a working class salary. This is not the reality today. We should not be behind. We shouldn't even be close to it. We should be winning on these issues. We should be providing better healthcare.
Your plan,
so will
you ask federal government for more funding, or these fundings are good enough?
I will continue. What I will do is I will spend the dollars that we have here first. So in other words, this government is sitting on public healthcare dollars, about $5 billion right now that they're not spending. They need to spend that money, and they need to spend it right now in our public hospitals.
So is that funding enough, what they are getting at
present? It will be a beginning. But there are other things that we can do. One of the things that I think we're wasting money too, we're wasting healthcare dollars in Ontario. We're spending so much money on these private nursing agencies. We're actually bleeding money out of our hospitals into those private nursing agencies, where the money is going to the shareholders, to the owners, but not into the hospitals.
You say we have enough funding in Ontario, but government is not spending.
I think we could be spending the money in a better way that actually invests in our public hospitals, that our operating rooms, are collecting dust. Let's open them up. Let's spend the money we have already before we start to look for more. But look, there's no question that Canada, our population is aging. We have a growing population. Our needs are going to increase. And that's why I think it's really important to also talk about prevention, keeping people healthy in the first place. And that means things like having those community health clinics where people have access to nurses and family doctors so they don't get sick and end up in hospital.
So moving to the next question, which is crime, public safety. Right now we got a call that today we had a break and enters. We have a carjackings. So how you see the crime situation in Ontario? Because Ontario is the biggest province here. Toronto is the biggest city in Canada. More people, more issues, more crime. But other provinces also feeling the same. The crime rate all over Canada has gone up in last few years. What are your thoughts?
Well, look, I mean, I know here in Brampton especially, we're dealing with some really significant issues, particularly car theft. I know that's been an issue that people raise with me all the time. And it's a terrible situation, right? To have people lose some of their livelihood and to feel so scared. We can't have people living like that. So I think a few things. First of all, I would say I'm waiting to see, I know on the issue of the car theft, I do want to see what the Peel police come up with because they have a task force underway. I want to see what their ideas are. But there's a lot that we could be doing right now on that issue that I am concerned that the Ontario Doug Ford government is not doing. We should be working with the auto manufacturers, with the industry to put in place mechanisms, technology to help prevent that theft. And we also need to work with Canadian border services, to try to stop the pipeline when people are actually the shipping of those vehicles internationally. I mean, we could close that right now. So these are things I think we could do there. But look, when it comes to violent offenders, we also have a problem, right? We need real bail reform. But one of the biggest issues we have right now is that the Conservative government under Doug Ford and the Liberals before them have not been funding our courts. So we have huge court backlogs. We need to make sure that those cases are heard, that cases don't get thrown out of court because our courts are so backlogged. These are things that the provincial government could be doing right now to help address those issues.
So 200 plus cars stolen every day in Canada.
Yeah.
1 billion plus lost to taxpayers, Canadian taxpayers, the Canada government,
Yes.
1 billion plus. And when we talk to the police chief, deputy chief, mayor, we talk to the premier also, they said the issue is with the ports. We have shipments going out of country. Even Ghana country, they asked Canada to proactive control our vehicles, stolen vehicles here, not in their country. So CBSA officers, less of the officers, there's no technology on the ports. If you become the premier, how will you tackle these issues? Because these are like passing the bucks on each other.
I hear you.
Passing the bucks on each other. If it is a federal issue, like same thing. We discussed about the healthcare because mass immigration. We talked about the crime is a mass immigration. How come criminals enter Canada? How come criminals got the guns? Why there is unchecked immigration? So if you become the premier, what will be your plans on tackling this? We want to hear from you.
I agree with you. I think there's a tendency among politicians of all levels to pass the buck and say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm a provincial politician, I can't solve that problem. That's not true, right? You as a premier, you have a responsibility to be fighting for your community, for your people.
So Doug Ford is not fighting for Ontarians?
I feel like Doug Ford is very quick to say there's all kinds of problems with violent offenders and crime, but I don't see him coming up with solutions. I would like to see him sitting down with the federal government and say, here's what we need to see happen right now.
So you agree that this is a federal issue more of a...
I think our ports, that's federal jurisdiction, doesn't mean that we're helpless, right? We have to be able to fight for those things. And, this is the difference for me, again, as I said, I look at Ontario, the Ontario that I came to when I moved here 30 years ago, and I look at it today, and I think it is not a better place, right?
So
it's a harder place to live in, and I want to make it better.
People say Canada is not a better place now because when we came 30 years ago, we came to Canada, I came to BC, I came to Ontario. So what Canada was 30 years, 20 years ago is not today. Crime rate across Canada high. Mortgages across Canada is the same. Crime rate and healthcare crisis all over Canada same. Do you think that the immigration, mass immigration, the unchecked, the supply demand things, we are not giving enough infrastructure to the newcomers because more of a burden coming to the Canadian economy, but we are not investing on that. Government's priorities are not on the line of giving back to the taxpayers.
I think that, look, we depend on immigration in this country, and we have for many, many generations. It's what helps our communities to thrive and grow and our economy to build. But we have to have a plan in place that ensures that the infrastructure, as you said, is there, that the housing is there for the people that are coming, that the jobs and opportunities are there, that the innovation opportunities are there, so we can continue to be leading in job creation. And we also have to address the needs of people who are already here. Right? We have to address the fact that people right here in our communities right now are lining up at food banks, even though they have full-time jobs, because they can't make ends meet because grocery prices are so high. So these are the questions and the issues that governments have a responsibility at all levels to be dealing with.
Yes.
And you're right. I really bothers me when people say to me, there's nothing that government can do to solve these problems. A lot of people are kind of giving up on government and they don't believe that we can change things. I don't believe that. I believe that government and politicians have a really important role to play. But we need to be out there with a plan. We need to not just leave it up in the air, and we need to address the issues that people are feeling in our communities right now. If we don't do that, our communities will become more divided. People will turn against each other.
And right now, what is happening? Municipalities passing to the province passing to the federal passing back to the province.
You see that on housing a lot,
in housing
right?
also, and the police also. Police is doing their best job, what resources they have. That what police chief says. We are doing our best, what resources we have. But seems these issues, what we discussed so far, these are the Canada-wide issues now. Because we have seen all the provinces are having those complaints of the crime, healthcare, and all those things. Being Ontario, the biggest province, has more population, has more highlighted. I'll move to the next college and universities. Again, we have a lot of international students who come here to make their careers. But what we have seen, the public colleges, universities, like recent protests are going on. What is the fault of the students? What is the fault of the universities? Student says that universities are not teaching properly. Teachers don't come to the classes. They charge us heavy fees. And university says these students got failed. That's why failed means failed. Why they are going on protest? Why our system has failed on every front? Either it's we take a topic and we are failed on that.
So my opinion on this is that the universities, the colleges in Ontario have been underfunded by our government. Our government has left universities and colleges to rely on international students to fund those programs.
Billions-dollar industry for the international students they bring to this country.
It's a huge industry. And our public colleges and universities also are depend upon it, right? They depend upon those international students. And I think we are failing all our students and our country if we're not addressing this problem, right? We need to be making sure that our colleges and universities have the proper funding they need. We need to make sure that we're providing the resources and that we're responsible to those students that we bring into our country. And at the end of the day, that is the responsibility of Doug Ford and the Conservatives right now. They've made a decision not to properly fund universities. We fund in Ontario, speaking of comparing to Canada, in Ontario, we fund far less our universities and colleges than any other province in this country. We are by far the lowest. And so how are we supposed to
fund
then...
the universities, but they are charging heavy fees from the students.
To the international students.
Yes.
Right, exactly. And I think the problem is we don't want to see tuitions increasing on anyone, right? We want to see our Ontario students also have reasonable tuition. Nobody, no family, no individual, no student should have to be struggling with tuition right now any more than they already are, because
So
life
if you
is so
become the
expensive.
premier, you will fund more
We
to
are
the university?
absolutely going to fund colleges and universities. We can't have a situation where our public colleges and universities are so dependent on international students, right? We want international students, but we want them to be able to thrive here, do well here, build families and communities here. And the way that this is working right now is not serving anyone well.
Marit, moving to auto insurance. Every election that was an election gimmick. But now situation is how any government can reduce the auto insurance, postal code discrimination when we have 200 plus cars stolen every day. Insurance companies are paying to the residents and insurance won't go out. I guarantee you that in next 50 years also insurance won't go out. Any party make any commitment, it won't go out, because when we cannot stop the cars jackings, car thefts, how will you control the auto insurance? What is your plan on that?
Well, I think you're right that, we have to address both of those things. But the postal code discrimination, precedes some of what we're already seeing now in terms of the carjackings and the car theft. So that remains a concern of us. And, the NDP, we've really been pushing this. We've introduced bills, I think, now laws maybe 4 times. Most recently in August of last year, we're continuing to push to end postal code discrimination. But you're right. If we don't stop this car theft, we are going to continue to see those issues rise. I still think government has a very important role to play there to end that postal code discrimination. But we have to tackle the car theft issue. And as you said, we really... Police they've got a task force, they're trying to address it. We need all levels of government to come together to try to solve this problem for Brampton. Bramptonians have elected people at the provincial level, at the city level, at the federal level. You know, these are the people that should be working for you to solve this problem. All sitting down together. If they're not doing it, something has to change. That's why I believe that the NDP, we can make that change. We have the ability, I have the leadership and the skills and the experience to make that happen.
If you become the premier, will you ask your MPPs to sit in your office Monday to Sunday, work there, instead of seeing in the religious places, in the parks, in the melas, and spending most of the time there with the photo ops, not working for the residents who elected them, all party across. We want to see them in their office solving the resident issues. Will you pass the order if you become the premier?
I think that one of the most important things that we do, I will say, as elected officials, is we have to listen to the residents. We need to take our lead from the people who elect us. So I think it's a very important thing to see politicians to come out, but they shouldn't just be talking to you, they should be listening to you, and then they should be going away and working, like you said, to solve those problems. If all you hear is promises and you never see the work happening, you've got a problem. That's why we do need to see some changes. I mean, we need to change the way that government does things. We need to change the way that politicians work, and that's what I want to do. You know, I think Bramptonians have been left behind for a long time. It wasn't just under the Conservative government. And we need to roll up our sleeves and we need to change things here. And I hope I can be part of that.
Infrastructure, normally, if we compare with US, we are way behind. Highway 413 is the issue Ontarians many want. There is two factors on that. What is your party stand? Why you are opposing infrastructure Highway 413?
Well, you know, what our point actually isn't to just oppose it. What we're saying is this plan is very, very expensive, and we're looking at least 10 years to get results. So is this what the best solution is for people in Brampton? And I think there are other things that we should be exploring. So for example, I think we should be looking at the 407. I think there's some solutions there and opportunities, probably for truckers, toll-free opportunities. One of the things I like to remind people is that last year, the government let the company that runs the 407 off with $1 billion. They were supposed to pay $1 billion penalty because they don't have enough traffic on the 407, and they were let off with that. They don't pay that. So that's $1 billion that really belong to the people of the province of Ontario that have not been collected. I want to see if they can't get those cars on, they can't get enough cars on the 407, let's look at other opportunities.
So your point is open 407 and make it free
for the public? I think it's something
we
should absolutely be looking at, especially for truckers, right? I mean, there's other ways to address some of these congestion issues, which are really important for people here.
So Marit, why not to open 407, build 413, because the mass immigration, because there was an article in the mainstream media that every problem has a background, the mass immigration. We need to invest in the infrastructure. We need highways, we need schools, we need parks, we need roads, we need hospitals, we need everything. If we oppose any infrastructure, so 407 will be congested. If government do invest in something, why do we oppose? Let's open the 407. Let's make the 413 also.
I think what we need is an actual plan, not a government like the Ford Conservatives or the Liberals before them that are just throwing out ideas. Okay, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, when we know that there may be more effective approaches. And I have to say too, 10 years, the expense that's involved. I want to know that there's a complete plan that's going to look at all, as you said, also look forward. Look, the point about schools is a really good one, because I see over and over again in this area of the province, we're opening new schools, and the moment we open a new school, we have portables out already. Why aren't we building those schools with a plan and a vision for what's coming, for the growth, for the new students that are going to be coming to our communities? We have no long-term planning, and we have a government that's not interested in that. They want to make, flashy announcements, about beer stores and things like that, but they're not really looking at a comprehensive plan, a plan that's going to work for years. We need plans that are going to be there for generations. We need infrastructure that's going to work for the long term, not just for the immediate. And we need to be investing our public dollars in a really responsible way.
So you agree with this, that we need 407 open it and make 413 later on after that?
I think we need to be looking at it as a comprehensive plan. And I'm very interested in collecting that $1 billion from the company.
Okay.
And I'm very interested in exploring whether a toll-free 407
Yes.
would be something that would work, especially for the truckers, which we know are such an important part of the economy here.
So
in
you are
Brampton.
not opposing any infrastructure?
I don't ever oppose
Okay.
infrastructure. I think infrastructure is super important. I sometimes disagree with the Conservative government about their priorities.
Okay, so priorities are missing everywhere. So Marit, British Columbia has a NDP government.
Yes.
I'll talk as an important issue for the youth, for the drugs consumption. Recently, the National Post, they published this article that BC plans to give safer supply recreational fentanyl to minors, and parents will have a no say on that. Do you agree with these kind of policies?
Well, I mean, first of all, I don't think that's what the British Columbia government is proposing
National
to
Post
do.
published this article.
I think I think it's not really what I understand that they're starting to do.
Okay.
But I will say this: I think that I know that there's a lot of people who are concerned about just generally drug use among young people. I know people here in Brampton are concerned about that, about the expansion of cannabis stores, for
Yes.
example. And this is something that concerns me too. I'm a parent of two
So
young
cannabis
adults.
stores concerns you? So government is earning revenue
Let-
from that, but we are putting you to this drug addiction.
So cannabis stores. I introduced a law that would, if the government had agreed with it and passed it, if the Conservatives had supported it, would have given municipalities more control into how many cannabis stores they have and how concentrated they are and where they're located. And I know that's a concern. And I did that because I heard from people here in Brampton and other parts of Ontario that was a concern for them. And I think it's really important. But I think it has to be combined with good health education in our schools, good information and support for people who are fighting addiction. This is the kind of thing that's really important. And I will say again, I brought that bill forward and the government, the Conservative government, has not supported that legislation. I don't know why. It's something that I know people in Ontario are concerned about. And all we're doing, you see, is proposing to give communities a little bit more control over the concentration of those shops in our communities.
So Merit, if this is true, we don't know, as you said,
I
might not
don't
be
think
true.
that's a true, yeah.
But if it is true, you don't agree with this policies giving youth or kids or minors the safe fentanyl and parents won't have a say if National Post article is correct.
I think that we have to take very seriously the rise in addiction in our communities. When I come to Brampton and I go to the Gurdwaras and I meet the Gurdwara councils and I talk to people in communities all across here, I hear a lot of people who are concerned about the rise in mental health
Yes.
and addiction issues here in
Yes.
Brampton. I know a lot of people are concerned about that. And I think that we have to take very seriously what the research is telling us
So
about
this is
what
a serious
works.
issue. If you become the premier,
Oh.
you won't bring these kind of policies here in Ontario, or
I believe in developing addiction services and treatment programs based on the best kind of research and data and health information that we have.
but not giving free or sample supplied fentanyl to
Well,
the
again,
youth.
I'm not sure what the
Okay.
BC government, what that article is about,
Okay.
but I do think that for the most part, what I see in this province right now is that we are not giving people the support they need to break addiction, and that there's lots of different approaches. One of them is safe consumption sites, absolutely. But we have to make sure that we're at the very start, we're providing the supports to families, to youth, to teachers who are teaching health education in our schools to make sure that we don't fall into that trap in the first place.
Merit, final question to you,
Yes.
which is again a concern for the Ontarians,
Yeah.
landlord-tenant board.
Yes.
So what is the issue with LTB? Why can't we fix it? Landlords, if they don't get a rent for 1 year, how will they pay the mortgages? There are professional tenants. They cry. And recently we asked Premier Ford. He said we are working on it. Earlier they said we had 40 new adjudicators. Now they said we are working on it, but landlords are suffering. How can you fix the LTB if you become the premier tomorrow?
Yeah, the landlord-tenant board in Ontario is not working well for anyone. It is not working well for landlords. It is not working well for tenants. It's a mess. It's very backlogged. And the government keeps saying they're going to fix it, but we don't see action. We need to hire many more adjudicators.
How many?
Well, we've proposed that they have to, radically transform it. But I will tell you this, that the landlord and tenant tribunal right now, and I know this is a concern for small landlords in particular, right?
That's right.
The other thing that they do, we see them doing this all the time, is prioritizing big corporate landlords over small landlords. And we know that it's small landlords who don't have the resources to be able to, fight these battles, right? So, and as you said, I mean, this could mean the difference between being able to pay your mortgage or put food on the table for your family if you're caught like this. So I think it's really important that we reform the landlord-tenant tribunal board, that we add adjudicators, and that we make sure that small landlords and tenants have the support and the timely, that their cases are heard in a timely way. Nobody should have to wait a year.
Do you believe 2 months no rent means right away eviction automatically? That should be the case what we have in US. If tenant don't pay a rent for 2 months, he should be evicted right away. That should be the policy. Do you agree with that?
I think we have to have a landlord and tenant board that is meeting regularly, that is hearing cases like that quickly. Because absolutely, if you're a landlord who hasn't seen rent in a few months, that's a really serious issue especially for a small landlord. Likewise, we have tenants sometimes that are also dealing with situations where a landlord, has left them without heat or water. This happens. I hear these cases as well.
Yes, we have
None
heard
of these situations are good, right? So the important thing is that when these conflicts arise, we need to have good, well-trained adjudicators meeting with those people quickly. And there's no reason that can't happen.
Do you agree
It's
with the 2
all
months
about
eviction automatically
resources.
if they don't get rent 2 months evict them?
I would say, every case is going to be a little bit different, right? And we need to make sure, again, that it's a fair situation, that both sides are heard. And certainly, if a person breaks the law and isn't paying, their rent, there will be consequences. But at this point, what we find over and over again is that tenants are often facing, outrageous rent increases as well. They're not getting their cases heard. They're being forced out of their homes as well. That happens too.
So you have a
And
plan to fix
landlords,
this?
absolutely. We have brought forward some significant plans to improve the landlord-tenant board. We've also talked about, and look, at the end of the day, these situations are just going to get worse and worse if we don't address the housing crisis that we have in Ontario, right? We have to build the housing, but we also have to build the truly affordable housing that so many Ontarians are going to have to depend on. If we don't address that, this is going to continue to become a much more high-pressure situation. And we also have to address the fact that, grocery prices are going up. So even the tenants, they're struggling too, right? So small landlords, tenants, everybody is struggling right now with the cost of living. We need to address that too. But, the landlord-tenant board is something that we in the NDP raise every week in the legislature with the Conservative government. And we have not seen them take action. And there's no excuse for it. The money is there. They need to properly fund it.
Okay. Marit, thank you very much for
Thank
taking
you.
our questions, and we wish you all the best for the future and keep the government accountable at all the time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So आज सीगे ओंटारियो NDP ਦੇ ऑफिशियल ਪਾਰਟੀ ਦੇ ਆਪੋਜੀਸ਼ਨ ਲੀਡਰ ਮੈਰਿਟ ਸਟਾਈਲਸ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕੀਤੀ ਇਸ਼ੂਜ਼ ਤੇ ਮੁੱਦਿਆਂ ਤੇ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਅਗਰ ਕੋਈ ਕਮੈਂਟ ਹੈ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵੀ ਜਰੂਰ ਲਿਖ ਭੇਜੋ ਦੇਖਦੇ ਰਹੋ ਪ੍ਰਾਈਮ ਏਸ਼ੀਆ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਆਪਣਾ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਲਈ